Have you ever walked through the grand halls of the Louvre, the Met, or the British Museum and felt a strange sense of curation? You look at the perfectly lit masterpieces, the golden frames, the plaques explaining exactly how you should feel about them. It feels complete, but it is a carefully constructed illusion. What you are allowed to see represents barely 5% of what actually exists. The truth of human history and the darkest corners of human expression do not live under the warm glow of gallery spotlights. They live beneath your feet. Deep underground, in climate-controlled concrete bunkers, lie the invisible archives. Millions of artifacts, canvases, and sculptures are locked away in perpetual darkness. If you ask a curator why, they will give you the polite institutional answer. They will tell you it is a matter of preservation, that light degrades the pigments, or simply that there is not enough wall space for everything. And for the vast majority of those hidden pieces, that is the truth. But there is a different category of art hidden in those vaults, a category they will never mention on the guided tours. Some things are not kept in the dark to protect the canvas from the world. They are kept in the dark to protect the world from the canvas. If you found your way to this video, ask yourself why. You were not looking for a standard history lesson. You felt the pull of the anomaly. You are here because a quiet part of your mind knows that the most profound truths are often the ones we are explicitly forbidden to look at. If you are the kind of person who looks for the cracks in the pristine walls of reality, you already understand why this channel exists. You do not need an invitation to stay, and I will not ask for one. You just need to keep your eyes open, trust your instincts, and follow the descent. Because today we're going entirely off the map. We are going to look at the one canvas that broke the rules of human perception. In the winter of 1942, a heavy wooden crate was moved into a subterranean storage facility in Europe under the strict supervision of military personnel and nervous gallery directors. It was not stolen art. It was not a casualty of war. It was a painting created decades earlier, purchased by a private consortium, and immediately condemned to be sealed away. It is a masterpiece by every technical definition of the word. The brushwork is immaculate, the composition is hypnotic, and the use of shadow rivals the greatest works of the Renaissance. Yet no museum in the world is allowed to display it. The ban is not due to explicit content, political subversion, or religious heresy. The ban is purely psychological. Every curator, psychologist, and restorer who has spent more than a few minutes examining the original canvas has reported the exact same symptoms: a profound, creeping sense of dread, a visceral nausea, the overwhelming certainty that the painting is fundamentally wrong. To understand the painting, you must first understand the mind that conceived it. Before the incident, the artist was not known for the macabre. In fact, during the late 19th century, he was one of the most sought-after portrait painters for the European elite. His early works are still displayed in prominent galleries, praised for their hyper-realistic capture of light and texture. He painted dukes, socialites, and scholars. He was a master of capturing human dignity. But around the winter of 1893, something fundamentally shifted in his perception of reality. The transition was not gradual, it was sudden, documented through a series of increasingly erratic letters sent to his brother. He abruptly canceled all his commissions, refunded his wealthy patrons, and locked himself inside his country estate. The letters describe a growing obsession with the geometry of shadows. He began to believe that light did not simply cast shadows, but rather that shadows were separate, ancient entities hiding in the architecture of everyday spaces. He wrote that human vision was flawed, biologically designed to filter out the most terrifying aspects of our environment so that we could function without going mad. He locked himself in his studio for 6 months. The servants who worked at the estate later testified that the large windows were boarded up from the inside. He refused to paint by natural light, relying only on the flickering, unstable illumination of cheap candles. He claimed he was trying to capture the exact visual frequency of a nightmare. During this period of isolation, he stopped painting people. He started painting the negative space around them, the spaces where nothing should exist. The few sketches recovered from this period show rooms that look ordinary at first glance, but feature corners that defy physical logic and doorways that seem to open into deep, suffocating voids. His mental state deteriorated rapidly. He stopped eating, claiming that the figures he was painting were slowly consuming the oxygen in the room. And then, at the peak of his psychological collapse, he produced the final canvas, the canvas we are discussing today. He did not give it a title. He only left a single note attached to the back of the heavy wooden frame, written in charcoal. The note simply read, "I have finally painted what looks back at us." When local authorities eventually broke into the estate months later, they found the studio entirely empty. The artist was gone, leaving absolutely no trace of his departure. But the painting was left resting on a heavy easel, perfectly positioned to face the door. The first officer who forced his way into the room took one look at the canvas, immediately walked out into the snow, and resigned from the force the very next morning. He refused to ever speak of what he saw in that room. This was the first recorded reaction to the artwork, but it would certainly not be the last. For nearly 30 years, the painting remained locked inside the private estate, hidden under heavy canvas. It was passed down through a complicated legal trust, explicitly forbidden from being moved or sold. But in the spring of 1924, the trust collapsed and the estate was liquidated. The contents were acquired by a prominent European gallery known for hosting the most exclusive high society exhibitions of the era. The gallery's head curator, a man deeply skeptical of local superstitions, dismissed the warnings attached to the painting's crate. He saw not a cursed object, but a brilliant psychological marketing. He decided it would be the centerpiece of their upcoming gala. He placed it at the very end of the grand hall, isolated on a dark velvet wall, illuminated by a single sharp overhead light. It was meant to be the climax of the evening. The exhibition opened at 7 in the evening. The hall was filled with wealthy patrons, art critics, and the cultural elite of the city. For the first hour, the atmosphere was standard for such an event. But as the crowd naturally filtered toward the back of the gallery to view the newly acquired masterpiece, the tone of the room began to fracture. It started with subtle physiological reactions. Guests who lingered in front of the painting for more than a few moments began to experience an inexplicable sense of vertigo. Conversations near the back wall died out, replaced by a tense, uncomfortable silence. Witnesses later described the sensation as a sudden drop in air pressure, accompanied by the distinct, primal feeling of being watched by something predatory. By 8:30, the physical symptoms escalated. A respected art critic suddenly collapsed, later claiming he suffered a severe panic attack triggered by the composition's geometry. Several women requested to leave the building immediately, complaining of acute nausea and a ringing in their ears. It was not mass hysteria in the traditional sense. The reactions were entirely isolated. People were not reacting to each other. They were reacting to the canvas. The geometry of the shadows, the meticulous layering of the dark pigments, was creating a severe cognitive dissonance in the human brain. The mind was trying to process an image that fundamentally violated its understanding of space and safety. At exactly 9:45, less than 3 hours after the doors opened, the gallery director made an unprecedented decision. In the middle of the crowded event, he ordered his staff to immediately remove the painting from the wall. They covered it with a thick drop cloth and carried it down to the basement vaults. No explanation was given to the remaining guests. The next morning, the local newspapers published glowing reviews of the gala, praising the sculptures and the classical portraits, but not a single article mentioned the centerpiece. It was as if the painting had never existed. The gallery had quietly sold the piece to an anonymous private buyer, and from there it disappeared into the subterranean archives, where it remains to this day. For decades after the gala incident, the painting remained locked away, officially classified not as an artwork, but as a psychological hazard. You might be asking yourself how a simple combination of oil and canvas can trigger physical illness and severe panic attacks in entirely rational adults. The answer does not lie in the supernatural, it lies in human biology. In the 1970s, a discrete study was allegedly funded by a private research institute to understand the mechanical effect of the canvas on the mind. They did not look at it as art, they analyzed it as a cognitive weapon. What they discovered fundamentally changes how we understand perception. The human brain is an evolutionary survival machine, hardwired over millions of years to instantly recognize patterns, faces, and threats. When we look at a painting, our brain immediately decodes the geometry to make sense of the space. But this artist, during his period of severe isolation, managed to paint something that aggressively disrupts that fundamental decoding process. He utilized a technique that researchers later referred to as severe visual dissonance. When you look directly at the center of the painting, your foveal vision, the sharpest part of your sight, registers a static, relatively normal architectural space. But the horror of the painting does not exist in the center. It exists entirely in the periphery. The artist layered extremely subtle asymmetrical geometric shapes in the dark corners of the canvas, using pigments mixed with varying levels of light-absorbing materials. These shapes mathematically mimic the exact proportions of predatory figures and distorted human faces, but they are painted just below the threshold of conscious recognition. When your eyes naturally scan the canvas, your peripheral vision catches these anomalies and instantly sends a massive threat signal to your amygdala, the fear center of your brain. Your body automatically prepares for a fight or flight response. Your heart rate increases, your breathing shallows, and adrenaline floods your system. However, when you turn your eyes to look directly at the perceived threat, the specific pigment layering causes the shapes to visually dissolve back into the background shadows. The threat disappears. Your brain is suddenly caught in a punishing, inescapable loop. It receives a violent danger signal, but your conscious vision cannot locate the source of the danger. This neurological contradiction is exactly what causes the profound vertigo, the acute nausea, and the unbearable feeling of being actively hunted while standing in an empty room. The artist did not simply paint a monster, he engineered a surface that weaponizes your own evolutionary survival instincts against you. He figured out how to make a two-dimensional object actively prey on the human nervous system. And knowing this, the true terror is not just what happens when you look at it. The terror is the realization that the painting is forcing your brain to see the monsters that are already hiding inside your own DNA. The institute that currently holds the painting does not acknowledge its existence on any public registry. It is stored in a customized climate-controlled vault that requires two-factor biometric authentication to access. But more interestingly, there is a strict protocol for the few researchers who are occasionally granted permission to examine it. They are not allowed to view the canvas for more than 4 minutes at a time. They must remain seated in a specifically placed chair exactly 8 feet away. And most importantly, they are strictly forbidden from bringing any magnifying equipment or high-resolution cameras into the room. The Institute claims this is for the preservation of the delicate pigments, but the internal notes of the facility tell a different story. The closer you look, the faster the visual dissonance takes effect. When you zoom in, the protective illusion created by the artist collapses. The peripheral shapes that your brain interprets as hidden predators suddenly snap into focus. The geometry of the shadows stops being abstract. The lines form faces. The brush strokes form limbs. You realize that the negative space in the painting is not empty at all. It is entirely occupied. The artist did not just paint a room with strange shadows. He painted a room crowded with figures, packed so tightly together that they blend into the walls, all staring directly at the observer. And because of the way the optical illusion is engineered, the moment you consciously recognize the figures, your brain permanently unlocks the pattern. You can never unsee them. They will always be there, looking back at you every time you close your eyes. In a few moments, I am going to show you a high-definition scan of the canvas. This scan was allegedly leaked by an archivist in the early 2000s and has been circulating on the dark web ever since. I have applied a slight digital filter to the image to soften the contrast and reduce the neurological impact of the geometric shapes. However, the core structure remains intact. If you are prone to anxiety, or if you are watching this alone in a dark room, this is your final opportunity to look away. I strongly advise you not to pause the video. Do not take a screenshot. And whatever you do, do not zoom in on the lower left corner. The image you are looking at now is the unfiltered scan of the canvas. At first glance, it appears to be an unremarkable, dimly lit room. The perspective is slightly skewed. The colors are muted and suffocating. But direct your attention away from the center. Look at the negative space along the lower left frame. Look at the geometry of the shadows cast by the unseen light source. Take your time. Let your visual cortex process the asymmetrical lines. What initially looks like a smear of dark pigment is mathematically structured to trigger human facial recognition. Once you see the first set of eyes looking back at you from the dark, the rest of the canvas begins to unravel. The room is not empty. The walls are constructed entirely of intertwined figures, painted with such profound distortion that your brain initially rejected their existence to protect your sanity. This is the weaponized visual dissonance the artist discovered in his final months of isolation. He did not simply paint an illusion. He mapped the exact visual frequency of human dread and permanently trapped it on a piece of fabric. The Institute knew that anyone exposed to this for too long would lose their ability to filter out the shadows in their own homes. You would start seeing the figures in the corners of your own bedroom when the lights go out. That is why it was locked away. That is why the gallery shut down in 3 hours. And that is why history tried to erase the man who painted it. If you are still watching this, you understand the value of what is kept hidden. Most people look away when the reality of the world becomes uncomfortable. But you stayed. You looked into the anomaly. I do not need to ask you to subscribe or like or engage with this channel. Those are metrics for people who need validation. If your mind is wired to seek out the blind spots, the erased documents, and the forbidden archives of human history, you will naturally find your way back here. The vault is always open for those who know how to look, and the curation is just beginning. We have barely scratched the surface of what lies beneath the pristine walls of our reality. This canvas was sealed away in 1942 because of what it did to the human nervous system. But as we close this file, it leaves a lingering, deeply uncomfortable question. If this is what they had to hide 80 years ago to protect the public mind, what exactly is buried inside the heavily guarded, climate-controlled bunker constructed in 2015? The one that does not exist on any official government map? Think about that tonight. Good night.